pain is not out to get us. Pain is not here to ruin our lives, right? Pain is so stinking clever because it finds all the ways to bring us back into the patterns, trying to attempt to get us to look at the original wounding.
Yes.
Hello. Please look at me over here, because I promise you, I'm not trying to destroy your life. I'm just trying to get you to honor and acknowledge me, because when you witness me, right? When you take a little bit of time to say, hey, I see you. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that happened. I am so sorry that happened. When you take the time to grieve alongside of me, right, then pain, can loosen my grip on you. Then I don't need to keep bringing you back to the same thing, but I will keep bringing you back to the same thing over and over again, not because I'm trying to destroy your life, because I am trying to get you to heal.
Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. I have a special guest. I know I say that, but I actually do. My pal, Vienna Pharaon, who wrote this book, The Origins of You. How breaking family patterns can liberate the way we live and love. And we just had a deep dive into original injuries and what she writes about in the book. And she has all of this experience. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist in New York City. She's been doing this for more than 15 years. Got her Master's of Science in Marriage from Northwestern University. She trained extensively at the Family Institute. So she's done tons of stuff. I actually know her through a mutual friend, Mark Groves. I started just getting turned on to her online presence and work, and I was like, wow, this woman is an original thinker. So I got really into her stuff, and then we became friends. Then I went to her book launch. Anyway, she's had a private practice for many years in New York. And what we talk about is how you can identify your origin wound. So there's certain childhood experiences that we have that creates this wounding that then we drag with us into our adult relationships. So what I love about this book is that she's really broken down the steps of how to identify what is your most, we would say, prominent origin wound. And then what to do about it. How do we honor the experiences that we've had? And the book, she's super candid in the book about her own life experience, which is what inspired her to write this book. So I hope that you learned something from this deep dive with Vienna Pharaon. And learn something about the origins of you. I'm super excited. Look who's on the show, you guys. It's my friend Vienna. Hi.
How
you
are
doing?
you?
Well,
I'm good.
No, a better question is, you're literally in the middle of still launching the hell out of this amazing, beautiful book called The Origins of You. I was talking about it at the top, how breaking family patterns can liberate the way we live and love. And holy crap, could not be more true. But I want to ask you, how are you doing? Because it's a lot.
Yeah, it's been great. You know, it's like the pub week, which you were there for, was fast and lots of moving pieces and lots of events and hopping on a plane and then coming back. And then it's kind of funny because then you just settle right back into your normal routine of seeing, my day-to-day is seeing clients pretty much all day, every day. And then weaving in some podcasts here and there and, doing some other events sprinkled in, but it's it's the both and for sure of, we're hyping this book and all the things that are going on. And then I'm putting my son to bed and, doing the normal day-to-day stuff that I was doing before as well.
Right. It's so true. It's like life goes on because it is what we do. And it's funny, you wrote to me and you're like, hey, how long are we going to go? Can I fit a client in after our interview? And I was like, yes, you can. But I understand because the work that you're doing with clients, of course, is what is inspiring, I imagine, you to want to help more people. I really, really, though, honestly, I love this book and think it is, the lens is original to you. Like the way that you're making original injuries that we have from childhood accessible and identifiable. That's the thing that I feel like is almost the most powerful, because
Mhm.
we all know, like, any person who is alive is like, yeah, I got some childhood crap, you know?
Mhm.
But it
Mhm.
is so much more powerful to be able to identify sort of exactly, and you've broken it down. So before we get into the 5 types of wounds and whatever, I want to talk a little bit about, like, after being in private practice for as long as you've been, why now? What prompted you to write the
Mm.
origins of you? Because it's a big undertaking.
It's a big undertaking, and my husband had been saying it for a long time. I've been making the joke that it takes me 2 years always to take his advice, and that is certainly true. But there was something about earning the right to write this book that felt
Mm.
so in my core. I really respect the field of marriage and family therapy. I admire and respect so many of the humans who have traversed this path before. And there was something about just getting to a place where it was like, I earned the right to be able to write about this. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people write books prematurely, or we're just throwing out books into the world because it's fun and a cool thing to do. And that wasn't what I wanted this book to be. I really wanted it to be a source that was coming from a place of like, oh, no, no, this work is really deeply integrated for me. And I think when we write from that place, you can feel the difference in it. And it's funny because where you started our conversation before about, yeah, like I'm a clinician by trade, right? Like every day, day in and day out, I'm seeing clients. And that part feels so important. I've had people say like, oh, will you stop seeing clients? Will you just speak? What's life going to look like now that you have a book out in the world? I'm like, no, no, life is going to look very similar to the way it did before, because without working with people, and you know this, without working with people day in and day
Mhm.
out, I could not have written this book without my
Absolutely.
clients, right? I can't write about relationships in the way that I do without seeing the intricacies, seeing all the layers, seeing all the different stories. And it's like, there's one thing to high level be like, oh, this is how you improve relationships, or this is how you move through family dynamics. But when you are living, breathing, sweating, crying, all of the things of all of the clients, right? At this point, it's been like, I've been saying 20,000 hours of direct clinical work with individuals,
Mhm.
couples, and families. It's way more than that at this point now.
Right.
It's like when you are in the work with people, right, that is how you can write and really resonate with as many people as possible.
It's so incredibly true, V, because when you think about it, right, if we're not seeing clients at all,
Mm-hmm.
it's like we have our own experience. And of course, I've been doing this 25 years, so I've got lots of client experience as well. But that is the well.
Mm-hmm.
That tells us what needs to be written. That
Mm-hmm.
informs us of the pain points that we see over and over again. And you're like, okay, clearly this is something that I need to
Yeah.
write about. So, your backstory, a little bit before we get into the book itself, is what sort of inspired you?
Mm-hmm.
I know all of us as therapists we got some reason why we want to do it. So, what inspired you to have this as your career?
Yeah, unsurprisingly, right? Like all of us clinicians coming into this work, whether we know it or not, to resolve our own pain. And,
Yes.
I didn't know it. The story, which probably isn't super surprising, is that my parents went through a separation divorce process starting when I was in first grade. It was a 9-year divorce process. And I'm an only child. So I was a tiny little human in this system that was really crashing and burning around me. So lots of psychological abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, paranoia, emotional flooding, just like tons and tons of chaos. And neither one of my parents remarried or repartnered. And so I share that because as an only child with parents who never repartnered, there were no other adults in the systems
Right.
either. Like there was no one there to really validate my experience. And so I was in this like broken system that was not doing well at all. And one of the roles that I took on as a kiddo was to fly under the radar, pretend like everything was fine, pretend like I was unaffected, unbothered by what
Mhm.
was going on, because I really didn't believe, through my tiny little perspective, that there was room to not be okay when the two adults
Right.
around me were really not okay. And whether that's
Yep.
true or not, right? Like they might say, of course there was room for you. And maybe there was, but my perspective at the time was
Yep.
that there wasn't. And that's what
Yep.
was so important. And so we know our family systems are our first education for all the things. And then we get plenty of other
Mm-hmm.
influences that, play into it along the way. But that's the first education. And I didn't
Right.
have a great education around boundaries, communication, conflict, love, intimacy, right? I saw a lot of really hard stuff. And so from an unevolved place, I wanted to get an education in how to have a relationship, a functional relationship, make it work, because I was so frightened. I was so fearful of winding up in a relationship like my parents, and really specifically like winding up in the role of my mom, right? Because that's how I identified as little girl, like, oh, this is who I'm going to grow up to be. And
Sure.
that's so hard I was like, that's unsafe for me, because I saw what the manipulation did to her. It was very crazy making. And it was so important for me to really protect myself in that way. So from an unevolved place, I got into this work because I was like, I cannot recreate the same thing. Even in the
Right.
first, the years of grad school, I entered in and I was like, my parents' divorce didn't affect me at all. They are good friends. We do holidays together now. And all of that was actually true at that
Sure.
point. But this was a continuation of me pretending to be fine, me pretending to be unbothered, me not being able to access and be in contact with the pain. And it was like one of the things that I learned in my life, and it's really related to the worthiness wound, was through a relationship with my dad, who was wonderful in so many ways, but he was conditional in his love when I was easygoing, present, validating, supportive, all of the ways he possibly could. But when I was hard, right, when I was difficult, when I was being a teenager, when I would challenge something, the way that he would punish was through withholding. And he would do that through the silent treatment, sometimes days, sometimes weeks on end. And so
Yep.
that really supported the story, right? That like, okay, be fine, be unaffected, don't speak up, don't share anything, because as long as you do that, you can create safety, you
Right.
can maintain the relationship. But then when you don't do that, right, it's like, oh, then it's all risked. And so for decades, right, I existed as a needless little girl turned needless woman. And so, yeah, this work was like birthed, of course, from my origin stories. And then I really got into the work of this, in grad school, of course, but finally, when I was able to see how the origin stories of my life were still controlling all of my behaviors and patterns as an adult, the
Yep.
relationships I was choosing, the ways in which I was boundaryless. And then I was seeing it with all my clients too. Every unwanted pattern that we have in our lives today that we can't shake is related to unresolved pain from the past.
Yep.
Okay, we got to look at it.
We do. It's a fact, but it's so tempting, and I see this with my clients, to want to be like, no, though, it's really
Mm-hmm.
my boss. He's really a dick. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
really, and I'm like, here's the thing. Your boss is a dick. Like, I'm not even saying your boss isn't a dick. I'm saying, though, you are the common denominator in the fact that your last four bosses
Mm-hmm.
were dicks. And like, what are you repeating?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you said is so powerful. The unwanted patterns that you cannot shake.
Mm-hmm.
There is a stickiness in these original wounds. There is something still charged. So let's talk about the wounds. So you talk about 5 origin wounds. You actually have a great quiz out
Yeah.
there too. So where can people find the quiz? Just tell
Yeah.
us that.
Yeah. Well, link in my bio, which is on Instagram, which is the easiest. We could put it in the show notes. We'll send it over to you just so people
Great.
can, easily click to it to help us identify what our primary origin wound is. Now that people are reading the book, Terry, like, they're like, is it possible to have all 5? It's like, yes, absolutely. But we're going to see which one resonates the most and have that be an entry point for you.
Right.
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about the 5
Yeah.
origin wounds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we'll do quick high level of the 5.
Yep.
And you'll see that what I like to say before people, because people are like searching and they want to have, okay, which wound is it? And da, 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 and how do I fit into this box? We don't fit into boxes. The pain in our lives is going to be internalized by you in a particular way. So an event that many of us might have can be internalized as a worthiness wound or a trust wound or a safety wound, for example. So like, I just want to say that out loud up front. You had a parent who abandoned you. You might internalize that as they abandoned me because I am not good enough for you to stick around. Okay, worthiness wound. You might internalize it as a trust wound. Okay, you left and now I can't trust the important people in my life. Bang. Okay, it could be internalized as a safety wound, right? You left and now you didn't care about the emotional safety, the care. You didn't have concern about how this would affect me and impact me and like set the framework for the rest of my life. Okay.
Yep.
So I want you to hear that before we dive into it. Okay.
Yep.
The worthiness wound. You grew up in an environment where you didn't feel good enough. You didn't feel deserving. A lot of times there's conditional love that happens with the worthiness wound. So if like hands up to the perfectionists, the performers, the people pleasers, the comic relief, the fly under the radar, like what did I need to do in order to get love, connection, presence, attention, validation, calm from the system? If I got straight A's, I got loved. When I got the B, I got the cold shoulder. When I got the hat trick, then dad was really excited and present with me. But when I didn't perform well on the field, there was a lot of anger at home, right? It's like really noticing, okay, what is the condition for me to get the thing that I want? But it also can happen with statements of harm, right? Where it's like some people grew up in environments where you might have had an adult straight up tell you you're unworthy, you're not good enough, right? So it's like these heartbreaking moments that put that into question. Okay, belonging wound is the second wound that I write about. This is where you grew up not feeling like you were a part of something, like you were an outsider, like you didn't fit in, like your differences weren't honored or respected. Some families have this kind of mantra, if you will, of, this is what we do in this family, right? Like this is what we believe. This is how we operate. This is what we think. And if you don't do it the way that we do it, you're out. Right? Like, and that might be through criticism. It might be through, it could be like the cold shoulder, similar to a worthiness wound, but it's like the way in which you feel like you are on the outside, where you're having to trade, your authenticity for attachment. We know that from Gabor, where he talks about how, attachment, when attachment is threatened, right? Kids will trade authenticity immediately. Every single time we have to, it's our lifeline. And so when we're tiny, we must do that in order to adapt to the system so that we are a part. But then there's a time, maybe later, sometimes those teenage years, where we start to rebel, right? And we like go the other path. Okay. Third one, prioritization wound. This is where you didn't feel important enough, right? Something else in the system was more important than you, generally on a chronic level, right? So maybe we had a parent who was a workaholic. Maybe there was other addiction in the home. Maybe there was a mental health challenge that took up a lot of space. A sibling who had an illness where your parents' focus was on that sibling instead of you. Maybe the conflict in the family was something that was just the focal point, right? So it's this moment where we're like, I don't feel important enough. There are other things that you choose over me, consciously or not, but leaves me feeling like I am not prioritized here. I always share this example because I think sometimes when we talk about wounds or pain or trauma, it's like we think it comes from this malintended place. It comes from abuse. It comes from neglect. Not always. I share this story of a client of mine who I call Andre in the book, and he's in the prioritization chapter. Andre has a mom, single mom, working multiple jobs, double shifts every day, except on Sunday mornings. They go to church together, have brunch together, but then she goes off to her job. And he loved her and respected her so much. He could sit in our sessions every single week saying like her working these doubles was in fact her way of prioritizing him. He could rationalize this all day, every day, but it didn't change the fact that at the end of the day, he didn't feel prioritized enough through time spent with her. Period. Right. So sometimes it comes from these circumstances that just play out in our lives. Okay. Final two. Trust wound. Okay. There's a betrayal, there's deceit, there's lies. So some of the big ones that we know about, of course, are infidelity, affairs. It might be a parent who gambles away an education fund, or just like some type of big rupture like that. But that also, it comes from maybe a parent making promises that they do not follow through on over and over and over again. Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you had a parent who made sweeping generalizations like never trust a man or never trust this type of person, that starts to infiltrate the system and become, the narrative that you hold because you haven't had a chance to question it yet. And then, of course, like family secrets, the things that we're asked, sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, to hold so that the outside world doesn't know or see. And then lastly is the safety origin wound, which, of course, when we're talking about the absence of safety, we are often talking about the presence of abuse. So it's a tender, tender chapter, exploring abuse, exploring neglect, exploring recklessness. But overall, a safety origin wound will come if you grew up in an environment where your overall well-being was not cared for, concerned about, was not respected, honored, or protected.
Mm. Wow, so many. I see though how people, in hearing this, right, you can think about your own life and go, okay, so I can see that there was some from this and some from this. But I do agree when you really look and just take the quiz, you guys, if you're wondering, you could just take the quiz, which is amazing and will help you narrow it down. But you really do find that there's one that is more prevalent
Mm-hmm.
than others. Because now, what do you find? I'm curious. I grew up in a home where there was two very different experiences. Meaning me with my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So my mother was very present, very supportive, incredibly loving, very affectionate, thought I was the best thing that ever happened. Oh, it still does. She's 85. Like, just team TC, just there. And then there was my dad who was absent.
Mm-hmm.
So he was there. He was fiscally responsible,
Mm-hmm.
but he was emotionally not present at all and worked. He was a massive workaholic. And so it's when I was taking the quiz, I was trying to figure out like how to answer the questions. And I guess I got really honest, and I think it was a worthiness. I ended up with worthiness
Mm-hmm.
because as much as I felt super worthy in one place and with my sisters very worthy and in social and all the other things, but of course I identify profoundly as having a father wound.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that you're bringing this up because it also reminds me that we don't all just grow up in one system either, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we have, for me or anybody who comes from a divorced family, or people in foster care in this system and
Sure.
like moving around or adoption, it's like there are different environments that we have to adapt to. And sometimes we do it even underneath the same home. It's like,
Yeah.
that's the story that you're sharing. And I think I love that you said I had to get really honest with myself because it's more palatable to go to the place where it's like, ooh, it was good, like, oh no, my mom was wonderful, or oh, I felt
Yep.
so loved, and and this, that, and the other. And to actually make space though for what the experience was
Yeah.
elsewhere, right? Outside of that. And I think for a lot of clients of mine too, it's like one household where they feel absolutely safe, but then they go to the other household every other weekend and that environment does not feel safe at all.
Yep.
And we have to explore both, all, however many there are, right? It's like
Right.
we're looking at the significant people in our lives and we're not just looking for the ones who showed up really well for us, right? This
Yes.
is not a hunt. This is not like, let's throw our parents under the bus. Let's not
Yeah.
go on a wild goose chase. This is about naming our experiences and honoring the pain that was there.
Without a doubt. And I think what I love the way that you share about it in the book too is reminding us that to heal, like this is our right, is
Mm-hmm.
to honor our childhood experiences. And I have to say, I think it's our obligation. If we are seeking to be whole adults and healthy adults and relationally sound,
Mm-hmm.
we have to do it. And I really appreciate the way that you talk about the fact that this is not, it's not about blame. Like, we have faith. Everyone did the best they could, or maybe they didn't. It doesn't even matter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because what actually matters is those lived experiences that so many of us deny
Mm-hmm.
and keep in the subconscious and push away. And like exactly what you said, you were a needless child who became a needless adult,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not being needy, the hyper independence that comes from not feeling like you can trust people and not wanting to be a burden. And again, I loved how you shared, maybe there was room for you. I don't know. It doesn't matter, because what you experienced was that there wasn't. And you adaptively changed the way you interacted in those spaces and then in the rest of your life based on that perspective, which is all we have.
Right.
And even in childhood, nobody needs to send a kid like an inner office memo about how to stay safe, right? You're in a family system, you're like, okay, so this person is an alcoholic and this
Yep.
is how they are when they drink or when they don't have booze or whatever. Like you
Mhm.
figure it out, because we want to live so much and we're so adaptive in that way.
So adaptive, and we do survive, right? Every single person who's here, who's listening to this, like, you found a way to survive. But what we didn't get offered, especially when we're tiny humans and teenagers and even in our 20s, it's like we're not like, oh, let me turn towards my pain and witness myself and actually grieve. It's like, no, we survive. We are brilliant tiny humans and teenagers and adapting and moving and doing all the things. And that's why this work is so important, is that I always say that pain is not out to get us. Pain is not here to ruin our lives,
Mm,
right? Pain is so stinking clever because it finds all the ways to bring us back into the patterns over and over and over again, trying to attempt to get us to look at the original
yes.
wounding. And wherever that original wounding happened, 4, 5, 6, 14, 22, don't care when it was, but like,
Yeah.
hello, 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 please turn back around, look at me over here, because I promise you, I'm not trying to destroy your life. I'm just trying to get you to honor and acknowledge me. Because when you
Yes.
witness me, right, when you take a little bit of time to say, hey, I see you. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that that happened. I am so sorry that that happened. When you take the time to grieve alongside of me, right, then me, high pain, can loosen my grip
Yep.
on you. Then I don't need to keep bringing you back to the same thing over and over
Right.
again. But I will keep bringing you back to the same thing over and over again, not because I'm trying to destroy your life, because I am trying to get you to heal.
Yes. Oh, mic drop. Amen. It's so
Right.
true. I always look at, repetition, compulsion,
Mhm.
in family systems and repeating these things, right? That's
Mm.
what we're talking about, is repeating these painful patterns, these unwanted patterns. But there was a part of me that always felt like it was the little kid inside who's like, I'm going to get a do-over. Like,
Mm.
this time is going to be different. And you're like, but here's the thing, without some intervention, without acknowledgement, without honoring the pain, without
Yeah.
integrating, it's not that
Mhm.
likely
No.
that it will be different.
Mm-mm.
And so the acknowledgement of what you're saying, the honoring of, the caring for the original
Mhm.
injuries, basically these origin wounds. So what do you think? Tell us, what is the most important thing a
Mhm.
person needs to know about origin wounds?
Okay, I'm coming right back to that because I cannot miss this moment to say that sometimes we trick ourselves when we do the oppositional path. So you're talking
Mm,
about the repetition, and sometimes we'll like, I don't know if you've ever seen this with your clients, the dating back and forth. So I date the person I always date, but then the next person that I date is totally 180 degrees
yep.
different, right? And so I want to say that here because it's like we've got this path of repetition, but we also have a path of opposition, which is repetition
Yep.
disguised,
Yes.
right?
Oh
It's
my God, that's such a
repetition
good point.
disguised,
Yep.
right? And that is so
Yes.
important. What were we going to say?
No, I love that idea. And I would see it in my clients and I would see it in myself, where
Yeah,
dating the unavailable person, then being the unavailable person. It's
exact.
like,
Yeah.
and we could say like identifying with the aggressor and then identifying with the victim. Like there's lots of
Mhm.
different ways we could sort of look at that patterning, but I love the way that you framed it,
Mhm.
because it's like a trick. It's
Yeah.
like trying to do the opposite. But again, either swing of that pendulum, either extreme, the same thing
Mhm.
or the opposite thing, if we don't understand
Mhm.
what's driving the thing,
Right.
we will still be in that repetition and still be in that frustration or still be in that pain.
Right.
So it's the path of opposition. Yes,
Yeah,
it
right. Because
is.
to use your language from before, like if you're dating the dick, but then you date the nice guy, like you're not healing just because you date the nice guy. Do you
No.
know? Right? Like
Yes.
it's that doesn't actually resolve what is inside of you. Does it
No.
change your day to day? Of course, right? Like is it much better than than dating the asshole? Yeah, but is it actually tending to the pain? No. And there's a
Mm.
number of different other issues that will likely present when we do the path of 180, the opposition. But it's like that the changing of the outside does not address what is within. Okay, so we needed to say that before we got off here.
Fact.
Whew. Okay,
All right. So you
back to
got the
your
question.
question. All right,
Okay.
you said what's one thing or what's the most important thing
What's
that
the most
people.
important thing that a person or people need to know about origin wounds?
Mm, okay, we all have them. Don't go on the hunt for what happened in those early years. I've been chatting with some folks who are like, well, I keep looking for what happened in 4, 5, and 6. And, I can't find it, but I do know what happened at 14. I'm like, see, the hunt for 4, 5, 6 is a distraction away from what you know. Okay. So
Yep.
yeah, it can happen at any time. An origin story is the first time something significant happened that sets the trajectory, right? That leaves us
Mm.
feeling unworthy, undeserving, not important enough, like we don't belong, like we can't trust, and we're not safe, right? So the first time that we can connect to that, we don't have to have all the details. We don't even have to have the memories. That's not that important, right? What we
Mm.
can sometimes do if we don't have memories from the past is just work back, right? When's the last time that I felt that? This
Yep.
work, you cannot heal without witnessing. I said it. You
Yep.
cannot heal without being a witness to yourself and also, having a witness in your life. Witnessing is something that moves the pain. It is
Mm.
required. I walk us through an origin and healing practice in the book, and that's one of the steps. So, 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 so important. But guess what? We do not need the person who put the pain there in the first place to participate in the healing. Thank goodness for that, right? We can
Yeah.
be witnessed by anyone. It's a therapist, a loving partner, a dear friend, sometimes even strangers that we meet at incredible retreats, right? It's like
Yeah.
that's all that it takes for us to begin to do this work. And so, yeah, those are some of the things. And then maybe the last thing that I would say is if you're curious about this work, one of the most important questions that a therapist ever asked me was, what is something that you wanted, needed most as a child and didn't get? And just sitting with that prompt and that question, moving the distractions aside. Oh, it was really good. Or like, no, I got all my core needs. Like actually making space to answer what you wish could have been different.
Mm.
Notice the sensation to rationalize, explain away, notice all the sensations and say, well, here's the explanation for why they
Mhm.
couldn't prioritize. Put a period at the end of the sentence of what you needed, of what you craved for the most, and just be with the emotion that shows up there.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful invitation. And the way that you say it, Vienna, it feels so like doable, right?
Hmm.
This doesn't have to be
Hmm.
impossible.
It's
This
not.
doesn't have to bring you to your knees. This is really from everything that you share in the book. And what I love about the book is that it really is you holding our hand and walking. Like, I feel like you're with us throughout the process and the steps that we're taking, but that how valuable it is just to stop, just to slow it down,
Hmm.
just to ask that question and
Hmm.
allow it to simmer.
Yeah.
It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be disappointed. And I think, you do it a lot throughout the book in a very positive and like a reaffirming way of the whole thing about we're not vilifying
Hmm. Hmm.
others, but prioritizing ourselves. Like, we're finally doing
Yeah.
the thing that for many of us, with whatever origin wound you have, didn't happen. in
Mhm.
childhood, and you can still love your parents in all their flawed glory, because then if you're a parent, trust me, as my mother would say, you're going to make all
Mhm.
your own mistakes. Oh, don't worry, you won't make my mistakes. You'll make all your own mistakes. So, like, we're not expecting anyone to be perfect, but there's something really
No.
powerful about just allowing yourself to
Mhm.
know what really happened. Because what I see in my clients so much, and I'm sure in myself too, is this desire to make it okay,
Mhm.
just to immediately jump to, but I'm fine. But
Right.
that was so long ago. But I mean, my parents did way better than their parents, right? And you're
Mhm.
like, tell that
Yeah.
to your 5-year-old who literally doesn't give a shit
Right.
what your parents experienced.
Right. Yeah. It's there's a path forward to living a life that you want and having the relationships that you want. But when you don't allow yourself to honor your experiences, right? It's like that's where pain will just keep pulling you back in. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you say it feels like I'm, holding your hand or like walking you through this. It's like that's what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to come through in this book. Is like we're doing some hard stuff, but I've got you, you are held throughout it. I love at the end of the book, I offer an exercise that is not mine, that is from Michael Kerr. And he says, think of your mother as your grandmother's daughter and see what changes, right? See what the perspective shift is. And
Mm-hmm.
I think part of this work is the intersection of grace and compassion for ourselves, for others, right? Remembering like, oh yeah, we were all tiny humans growing up in imperfect and flawed systems, right? We all have a story.
Yep.
And accountability and ownership, right? Like context is not an excuse. It
Yep.
can't be, but we have to ride that line well, right? Because
Yep.
otherwise, if we hang out in like blame and hatred and this, and it's like that's going to block something. And if we're in but they did the best that they could always, and like that ignores honoring ourselves. And
Yeah,
so,
it
yeah,
does.
when we can start to see the very important people in our lives, even strangers, right? Like, oh, right, you were a tiny human growing up in a flawed and imperfect system, right? There's a story there, of course,
Yep.
but not letting that be the thing that avoids, that the context then avoids your pain, right? That's something we have to get better at. And I hope that we do
Yep.
so through the book.
I think that we do. All right, last question for you. Well, I have two
Okay.
more. One is, how was this writing very candidly about your own life experience? I found the book like mesmerizing. Your stories
Mm.
were just so, I was so into it. You guys, you need to go get this book. Just by the way, it's called The Origins of You. Right there. How breaking family patterns can liberate the way we live and love. It is available everywhere. All right, that was a plug for the book. But moving back to,
Thank you.
how was it writing this? Because your folks are
Mhm.
living, right?
They are. Yep. Yeah, they are. And we talked about it a little bit. Neither one of them wanted to read it before it came out, but my mom wound up reading it about a week before it pubbed. And, it was really remarkable to see her response. I remember she closed the book at one point. It was like she acknowledged something in that moment. It was just like really an authentic moment. And it was something I'd never heard her acknowledge before. And later we had gone on a walk after she had finished the book, and we were sitting on a rock, and she's like, is there anything I can do to help you with your healing? It's like,
I'm crying right now.
wow, right? Like that was so special. And the answer was like, no, actually, no, I'm in a good place with this. And, I actually don't need you to do anything, but I acknowledge you. And I'm like very grateful for the question.
Yeah.
It was interesting because sharing my story was very important because it's of service. It's not raw for me anymore. It's of
Mm,
service. I think as clinicians, it's really important for when we do self-disclose that the self-disclosure is rooted. It's grounded. I don't need any reader to
absolutely.
take care of me. I don't need any
Yep.
client to take care of me. Like this is in a place. It was interesting though that my dad had a bit of a reaction to it. I remember him saying with the opening story, and people should
Mm-hmm.
know I have a great relationship with my dad. My dad was a phenomenal dad in so many ways. And I remember him saying, there's more context to it. And I said, Dad, I know that there's more context. I said, I know what the context is. He goes, you do? I said, yeah, here's what the context is. And he's like, well, yeah. And he said, but here's the point. I got to tell you, I intentionally didn't share the context because that's what I want people to move away from. There's
Mm,
a story, of course there is, but that's not what it's important here. What's important is that my 5-year-old, 6-year-old self experienced it in this way, and the context would have been the distraction. So it's been really cool. It's like we've had these moments of having really incredible conversations about it. And I'm sure that there's, tenderness as parents to kind of read back and it be in print and know that other people are seeing it. But I'm grateful that they were, that they agreed to be, in service of this to others. And I share with them when people say, oh my gosh, this is, changing my life. And they're like, okay, it's worth, it's like, it becomes
Yes.
worth it on some level, right? Where they're like, okay, that's okay. Good. Yeah.
It's so true it takes so much courage though to do
Yeah.
it. And I waited so long to write a book, and I was so tentative. And, even though my mother said it was fine, she was like, Terri, it's your story.
Yeah. It's
Who
your
am I to say what
story.
you have a right to write it how it happened for you. And then of course she starts reading the book, and I could see her
Uh-huh.
face when I'm describing them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wait, does she remember that she gave me full permission to write this
Right.
book? This is already,
Uh-huh.
when we were at the end of the process, I was like, oh my God. So
Yeah.
my last question for you, my friend, is when it comes to boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
what has been your biggest boundary challenge, and how have you overcome it if you have?
Yeah. I am very well boundaried now at this point in my life, but I wasn't for a really long time. You heard me say it before. I was a needless little girl turned to a needless woman, which meant that I was boundaryless. And I
Mm,
would, when you are someone who has to say over and over and over again that you're fine and you're unbothered, like there's zero, you're overly porous in that space. And that was true for me for a long time. I have a catalyst moment in my mid late 20s. I'm dating someone and his ex comes back into the picture. She wants to be back with him, and he's trying to decide whether to go back in the relationship with her or stay in the relationship with me. And automatically, boom, my response is, oh gosh, of course, take all the time you need. I can imagine that this must be so hard for you, right? Like kind of therapist part being like, context, of course, there's layers, there's a story. This is so hard for him. But also, hey, role from childhood that's like unaffected, unbothered, be the
yep.
cool girl, have no needs, yada, yada, yada. This is the best way for you to be chosen. Whew. And I was having conversation with a shared mutual friend of ours, Mark, and it all clicked in. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. I have zero boundaries. I don't express myself. There is no respect. And finally call up the guy, and I really saw a future with this person. And I said, I am affected. This is hurtful. This doesn't feel respectful. I'm not okay with what's going on. And I'm going to remove myself from this situation. It was the last time we talked. And I remember like palm sweating, heart beating out of my chest, stomach in knots, and this wasn't like an empowerment moment, Tara. I wasn't like, yeah, I told him. I was like on the bathroom floor crying for like 2 months afterwards, but I still did the thing, right? It was like, I still did the thing. And I have to tell you that that was the moment in my life where it was like those, I was on the tracks, the familiar tracks, the ski tracks in the snow. Like, I know this thing. I go down this path. This is the easier one. And in that moment, I jumped off of the tracks and I got into fresh powder. And it was way harder for me to get through it. But I was like, oh, I'm laying down the track for a new behavior. And
Yep.
now if you ask my husband, Connor, whom you know, he would say, I do not know that woman who was not expressive, who wouldn't set a boundary, da, da, da. Like the moment that I did it, the moment I said that I am affected, that I'm hurt, that I'm allowed to have an opinion, that I can be
Mm-hmm.
expressed, right? It was like, you actually can do that.
Yep.
And I had to reconcile, the pain, the wounding of, what I had shared before about my dad with the silent treatment and all, and the role. I had to spend time witnessing that and grieving the loss of what that had done to my life in order
Yep.
to stay committed to speaking, to sharing how I feel, to saying no when I mean no and yes when I mean yes, and not really self-betraying in that space. So that's my boundary answer to you.
Beautiful. Oh my God, I love it so much. Well, thank you for everything you do, for writing this beautiful book. You guys, you really want to get this book. Don't you want to know what your origin wound is? I know you do. It's the origins of you, how breaking family patterns can liberate the way we live and love. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.